Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at the Brookfield Zoo on the most important day of the year. No, not Election Day, it's World Jellyfish Day today. So today we'll take a few minutes to chat about the two species that we care for here, which are moon jellies and upside down jellies. And then we'll have time for some questions from you guys. So thanks for joining us, and we can kind of take a peek at our first species to look at here, the moon jellies. So the first thing we should probably say about jellies is that we often call them jellyfish, but it's important to note that they are not related to fish in any way. They're actually an invertebrate, so they're related to, it means they don't have a backbone, so they're related to 98% of other life on this planet, which is also invertebrates. I mean, obviously we love to celebrate all of our mammals here in the collection, but most of the animals in the world are a little lowlier, a little less spine, have a little less spine, just like these moon jellies. So when you talk about jellies, it's not really a specific group of animals either. There's a lot of different variation within the group called jellyfish. So there are things that are actually chordates, things like salps, which are actually more closely related to us. There are box jellyfish that everyone knows of as being very potentially dangerous to you. And then there's the Medusozoa, which are kind of the true jellies, the things that kind of have an umbrella shape, and then tentacles and oral arms and look like a sea jelly that you'd see. So jellyfish, I think probably, there's a lot of interesting things about them. Probably the most interesting thing is their life cycle. So we can actually show you a few different elements of a moon jellyfish life cycle. So we'll call this stage as the kind of, depending on how you look at the circle, we'll call this the last stage, the reproductive stage, the medusa. And this stage sort of floats around in the ocean and releases sperm and eggs to create polyps, which are down here. So all these little white fuzzy bits that you see on this plate are all individual moon jelly polyps. And they have stinging cells just like a adult moon jelly. They look a lot like a sea anemone, only they're teeny tiny, and they are in the same phylum with sea anemones and corals, cnidarians, which means they have stinging cells. To get to the next stage, you start with sort of this here, which is a blown up version, model version of the polyp that you just saw. And then they go through a process called Stobilation, where they kind of make a stack of little pancakes, which are all these little ephyra here. And then eventually, when they become mature, the individual ephyra pop off and then take off into the ocean, where they grow and eventually become a medusa. So, let's see if we have. Let's get us set up here. So if you look closely in this tube, we have some ephyra. So these are just a few weeks old. They've strobilated a few weeks ago. So they're already, maybe they've grown about twice the size of when they first strobilate off of that polyp. So you can see these are juvenile jellyfish, I guess you'd say, or more correctly, ephyra. And then we raise these for a few months before they become sort of small adult jellyfish. So these are not kind of reproductively ready yet, but they're already sort of making their way out into the world and getting moved about by ocean currents to conquer new areas of the ocean. So anyway, so that is the kind of standard jellyfish life cycle for a true jelly. They'll have kind of that 4-part life cycle. People always want to know what a jellyfish eats. Obviously, they can potentially sting people. Some jellyfish, like the moon jellies, have a pretty mild sting. They have specialized cells that are especially concentrated on the tentacles along the margin of the bell, and then also on the oral arm that they can use to sting prey or potentially sting people. But those cells are called cnidocysts. And those cells are not very strong in moon jellies and upside down jellies that we have here. But what they like to eat is generally small plankton, which can include, here if you look down here, so this is what we mostly feed them here. These are brine shrimp nauplii. If you've ever hatched sea monkeys, that's what these are. So we hatch them by the millions a day here to feed to our jellies and to also some of the other smaller animals in our aquatic collection. So in the wild, they'll eat similar things to this, various copepods, maybe larval fish. So any small things that their tentacles bump into, a jellyfish will try to eat. So they don't have, they have a mouth, so once they catch their food, if you look closely at the adult, you might be able to see some. They have like kind of gastric pouches. So those horseshoes are sort of reproductive organs. So like in this animal here is probably a male that you're looking at straight behind, because it's got a very clean edge of the horseshoe. But then if you look at the one a little bit above and behind, yeah, that one has more of a diffuse edge. That's a female jellyfish. But also they have gastric pouches that sort of run along the sides of those gonads. So I fed them earlier. You can see a little bit of like the red color of the brine shrimp nauplii in their gastric pouches. So they ingest food that way and then sort of eject it out of the same opening. They don't have a mouth and a back end. They just have one opening to do all the work. So if you want, we could take a little peek at the upside down jellies. So upside down jellies, you can see they have the same sort of body plan as the moon jellies. They have a bell and then some oral feeding arms that stick out from it. But the reason they're called upside down jellies is that they lay down on the substrate, typically like a lagoon or a mangrove type habitat, and face upward towards the sun. And they'll pulse like that, so they'll still eat a little bit of like planktonic life, but they actually have symbionts in their cells, zooxanthellae, which are algae that live within their cells, and it's a great relationship that the two have. The algae provides extra nutrients for the jelly, and the jelly provides a safe and protected home for the algae that lives within its cells. So it's a great symbiosis that you'll see in the ocean.
What's this fish that's in with the upside down jellies?
Sure. So the fish that are in there are purple tangs from the Red Sea. There's also some sea urchins that you'll see on the rock, and those were actually aquarium raised sea urchins. And they help eat algae. So obviously we have to provide, in addition to the brine shrimp that I showed you earlier, we provide pretty strong lighting for this exhibit, which means algae grows pretty readily. So the purple tangs and the sea urchins help keep the algae down a little bit so that it doesn't sort of overwhelm the system and the jellies.
How long do jellyfish live?
They can live for years. So in the polyp stage, which depending on how you view it, you might consider the adult, they can live for potentially decades or longer in that stage. As a medusa, like a moving adult animal like this, typically a few years, although to some degree it depends on their ability to avoid danger. They don't have a great swimming ability necessarily. They have some sensory organs that help to know like where they are in the water column, so that they can kind of move up and down. So mostly it has to do with their ability to avoid predation, is kind of how long they'll live, and also avoid ocean currents and things that might pull them inshore, which would not be favorable for them, for most species anyway.
So what kinds of predators would they have?
Sure. So sea turtles are a big one, and that's one of the reasons that sea turtles are in trouble, because a jellyfish looks a lot like a plastic bag. So it's really important to try to reduce your usage of plastics and then getting that in the ocean, because sea turtles who normally would eat jellyfish can sometimes confuse plastic items for natural food items. So you want to be really cognizant of that and kind of reducing your usage of those things. Mola, which is the largest bony fish in the ocean, also eat a lot of various jellyfish species. So I think those are probably some of the most notorious predators of jellies. But there's not much there. Jellyfish are something like 96 to 98% water and a little bit of collagen, a protein that holds them all together. So they're not the most nutritious. So if you're going to eat jellyfish, primarily you have to eat kind of a lot of them to get much nutrition out of it.
How many jellyfish are in just this one exhibit?
This exhibit I think is 35-ish, and they're, I would say, subadults. They can get up to the size of maybe a small dinner plate for the upside down jellies, and about the same for the moon jellies, the dinner plate size.
So I had a question about these the gonads. So
Sure.
they all seem to have 4 except for one.
Yes.
That one's
So
got
they're
6.
animals called tetraradial. Most of them are dividable like a pie in 4 pie pieces, I guess you'd say. But once in a while, especially in an aquarium environment, you get animals that have unusual symmetry. So we have this one, which is a 6 kind of set. There's probably pros and cons to each. So an animal like that is going to need to eat more, but they also get to reproduce more because they have a whole extra set of reproductive organs. So they're going to need to eat more and need more oxygen. So if their environment can't provide that, they won't last very long. But in an aquarium environment where it's relatively controlled and we control how much food everyone's getting, you can usually have animals that have odd symmetries do pretty well.
So you've talked about the various stages, the life stages. Do the food sources vary for each stage?
Actually, the one convenient thing about jellyfish keeping and culture is that, for moon jellies anyway, is that you can raise even the ephyra, the polyps, and the adult medusa on the same food source. So, and that's the brine shrimp nauplii, and you can supplement that with kind of some frozen foods and things like that, but the primary diet is going to be brine shrimp nauplii.
Can you remind us, are they poisonous?
Yeah, so they're venomous. So they have specialized cells called cnidocysts, which have stinging like a touch-activated harpoon in them. So that's why if you touch a jellyfish, it'll try to harpoon you with that tiny microscopic harpoon. So these jellies don't have a particularly strong sting. You can handle them with your bare hands. But if you're ever out in the wild and you see jellies on the beach, obviously you want to kind of give them their space. Because you're not, if you're unable to make an identification, you're better to be safe than sorry. Something you can look at closely is these sensory structures. So as you go along the bell, you see there's kind of these little divots where the disc margin comes in. So those are their sensory structures. They're called ropalia, and they contain 2 elements. They have an ocelli, which is a very primitive eye that lets them know if they're in the light or dark. So if they need to try to move upward in the water column or down, depending on where they want to be. And then they also have statocysts within them, which tell them up and down. There's like a little structure in there that lets them know if they're moving upward or downward, if they're facing up or down. So even though they're pelagic and planktonic, which means the ocean currents generally carry them wherever they go, they actually do have a little bit of control, and that's why they have the kind of rudimentary sensory system.
Are there any misconceptions about jellyfish or really cool, unique facts about jellyfish? Anything like that you'd like to share?
I think everything about jellyfish is sort of weird. So there's not a fact you can say about a jellyfish that isn't weird. I think misconception, people think they're electric. I hear that a lot out here. So they aren't venomous. They have those venomous cells, but they're not electric. They also don't change colors. We tend to keep one lighting scheme on them, but some places you'll see jellies, they'll put different color lights that change, and people maybe think that the jellies are changing color, but they're pretty much the camouflage for the open ocean. One of the best camouflages is to be as clear and see-through as you can, and that's the route that most jellyfish employ, is to be see-through. So they don't change color, but based on the light, they'll be slightly different looking, which helps them camouflage out in the open ocean.
So they're not actually blue-gray?
Yeah, they're not really blue-gray. They're sort of like an off, just shy of transparent, I guess, a little translucent.
Have some types of jellies become invasive in particular areas?
Yeah, absolutely. They can be a great indicator of an ecosystem that's maybe a little bit out of whack. So you know that their diet is small plankton. So if you fish all of the small fish that eat small plankton, that allows for a bigger jellyfish bloom. So if you're in a place where you see tons of jellyfish, it might be a sign that an ecosystem is a little bit out of line. But that said, you get some jellyfish blooms are natural. I would say if it's a change from the past, that might be an indicator that something's not quite right with the rest of the whole ecosystem.
So as you said, they have these sensory systems, but they don't have like actual eyes, right?
No, they call them ocelli. They're basically just to let them know whether it's light or dark. And that's about the extent of the information. They don't have a brain to process it in the same way that a person does. They just have kind of a nerve net, so they have a few nerves and things. So they're relatively primitive as far as evolutionary connections go, but you can see even in a relatively primitive animal, they have some adaptation to deal with their environment and to be aware of kind of their surroundings and how to best look for food and such. So,
is there anything else you'd like to add?
Jellyfish are great. Thanks for joining us here for World. Thanks for joining us here for World Jelly Day. Hope you got a good look at them here, and we're excited to be open again and have you here as soon as we can be. But in the meantime, definitely get your tickets for
Holiday Magic?
Holiday Magic, yes. Get your Holiday Magic tickets and join us.